It's story time. Come on, grab your friends. We'll go to imagination's end. Through song and laughs, there's lots of learning, and the fun never ends. It's story time. Hey everybody, and welcome to Storytime Snippets. I am Mrs. Allie. Today I'm kind of a Mr. Allie, and I'm here in the Naples Library, and I'm here to offer you some Storytime Snippets. There's something a little bit different about me today, isn't there? Can you spot what is so different? Anything glaringly obvious about my attire or presentation? Maybe this giant beard that I'm wearing. It's so weird and silly, isn't it? Well, I wore it on purpose today because today is a holiday. Did you know that today is a holiday? Not many people do because it's a new holiday. Today's holiday is called National Be Who You Are Day, where we are here to encourage you to be yourself. Now, why does that mean I'm wearing a beard? Well, I'm here to answer those questions for you, of course. There's always a reason that I do these silly things. So National Be Who You Are Day is actually a holiday that was created by our favorite, here, let me flip this just for a minute here. 1 second. Flip. Our favorite children's author, Todd Parr, who writes books about being yourself and how it's okay to be yourself and be different from other people, because everybody is an individual and everybody's different. So I thought. I put on my thinking cap and I thought, what ways can I make Storytime Snippet fun for everybody and also teach you that it's totally awesome to be yourself? And there were so many different activities that I could choose from, but that required you to be in the same room as me. And I really wish you were, but since you can't be, we're going to actually be telling a story that's a true story, a totally and completely true story, which is super wild. And that story is about a man named Joseph Palmer. Joseph Palmer lived in America about 230 years ago. And if anybody knows anything about Joseph Palmer, he was persecuted. That means he got in trouble for having a beard. Isn't that crazy? So today we're going to be talking all about Mr. Joseph Palmer, and I have a felt board story to show you about Mr. Joseph Palmer. And we're kind of basing it off of this book that was written by Patricia Rush Hyatt, and also about some facts that I found when I did some research on him. So it's a little loose here, and not quite exactly like Mrs. Hyatt's story. So are you ready to learn all about a man who went to jail for having a beard and daring to be different? I'm totally ready to teach you. All right, everybody, let's move this over. All right, give me 1 second here. I'm going to flip the screen back around. Whoop-de-doop, boop. There we go. And just collect myself a little bit and introduce you to a very hairy man. This very hairy man is named Joseph Palmer. Joseph Palmer, I know he has a black hat on and you can't really tell because I made it the same color as the background. Whoops. Joseph Palmer lived in a town called No Town, Massachusetts. And he was born there and raised there. And it was just an ordinary town. And everything in that town was ordinary except for Mr. Joseph Palmer. And everybody in that town during this time nobody wore beards. Nobody had any beards on. All of the men shaved their faces super duper clean. Can you see this? I know it's kind of hard. This is a man whose face is totally clean, and he's going to be standing next to Mr. Palmer here. And this man and a whole bunch of women would completely shave all of the hair off of their body, and the women would pull their hair back super tight into little buns on the back of their head and wear bonnets. And anybody who showed their hair was bullied. Everybody who showed their hair was picked on, so nobody had any long, crazy hair, except for a man who was a little bit different, like Mr. Palmer. Mr. Palmer insisted on having the longest beard he could grow. And everybody hated it. So it's crazy. But people hated his beard so much that they were mean to him. They bullied him. They stared at him. They called him names like Beard Palmer. And they wouldn't let any of their children play with his children. So his family was a very lonely family. Everywhere they went, people would criticize Joseph's beard, even in church on Sunday. The people of the town would tell him, here, these are the people of the town. They would tell him, cut your beard off, shave your beard, it's a disgrace. It's ungodly to have hair like that, Mr. Palmer. And even the preacher told him that that his beard looked like he was the devil. Oh no! They told him he looked like the devil. So you know what Mr. Palmer said to that preacher? He said, Mr. Trask, you are mistaken in comparing me to the devil. I've never seen a picture of the devil with very much of a beard at all. But our Lord and Savior Jesus wore a beard not unlike mine. It was very difficult for the preacher to say anything after he said that, right? But this was just the beginning of Mr. Palmer's bad beard experiences. Early one morning, Mr. Palmer was on the way to the market with some new and fresh, beautiful, delicious, cucumbers, some produce that he took to the market to sell. So he was walking merrily on his way down the road when all of a sudden there were 4 men. 1, 2, 3, 4. And those men had showed up with scissors and with a razor. They were going to chop his beard off, even though he really didn't want it chopped off. They were going to jump on him, hold him down, and cut his beard off after all, once and for all. But Mr. Palmer was like, oh, no way. You are not cutting my beard. This is my beard. This is my body. You will not do that to me. So when the men tried to jump him, he jumped on them, and he wrestled, and he punched and kicked and screamed, and the men were beat up. The scissors and the razor went flying. And the cucumber spilled everywhere. Oh, golly gracious. So Mr. Palmer straightened himself up. And then he picked up all of his cucumbers off the ground, and he peacefully walked to town to tell the judge about what had happened to him. When he got to town to tell the judge, oh no, those men had already gotten there and told him their side of the story, which of course made Mr. Palmer the bad guy. All these guys told a lie. They said Mr. Palmer jumped us and he beat us up. And he's such a terrible, terrible guy. Look at that beard. He's got a terrible beard. And they cried and cried to the judge. And the judge was like, Mr. Palmer, with your terrible beard, I sentence you to 1 year in jail. 1 year in jail for having a beard and defending himself against these evil men. Isn't that crazy? Oh my gosh. So Mr. Palmer, not having done anything wrong, had to go to jail for an entire year. They threw him in jail. While Mr. Palmer was in jail, the jailer said to him, look, see here, sonny. This is his key. He's the jailer. See here, sonny, I only have one rule, and it's that every man must shave once a week. We do not allow hairy men in jail. To which Mr. Palmer, of course, said, I will not shave my face. This is my face, this is my body, and I will not shave. Well, of course, the jailer didn't like that, and he was going to try to shave him anyway. So he came down the hall with a bucket of water and the scissors and the straight razor. And he said, we'll teach you, Mr. Palmer. We're going to shave you anyway. And Mr. Palmer, seeing the water, the bucket, the razor, and the scissors coming, kicked and shouted and screamed and wouldn't let them near his face, no matter what. And the jailer did not like that at all. So this big, mean jailer man sent Mr. Palmer into solitary confinement. Do you know what solitary confinement means? It means that he went to a space where he was all alone, just only by himself. No one else in there. No one to talk to, nothing. No human interaction at all. He sent him there for 3 months. 1, 2, 3. That's like August, September, and October, or the whole length of summer. That's a really long time to send someone in by themselves. Really long time. I would go crazy. Would you go crazy? I would. So, the jailer sent him to solitary confinement for 3 months, and the only person allowed to visit him while he was in solitary confinement was his beloved son. His little son would bring him bread in a basket every day. And when his son would bring him that bread in a basket to eat, I just realized this might be cutting this off a little bit here. 1 second. There. Sorry, everybody. And when his son would bring him that bread in a basket every day, Mr. Palmer would super sneaky write a letter. This is the letter he would write. And he would hide it underneath the bread. And his son would sneak it out of jail. Shh. Sneak, 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 sneak. So he would write letters to people and hide them in the basket. His son, one day, was directed to take the letter that he wrote to the newspaper. The letter that Mr. Palmer wrote on it said that the conditions in the jail were terrible, that there were rats and mice and lice and fleas and all sorts of creepy crawlies and bugs. In addition to that, they didn't even give him a pillow and a blanket to sleep on. They just expected him to sleep with nothing, and he was being horribly punished for the crime of having a beard. So the son took the letter to the newspaper. The newspaper came out the next day, and guess who read that newspaper? Everybody everybody in the town read how badly he was being treated. Among those people that read that letter, or that newspaper, was the jailer. The jailer read the letter, and he became so angry at Mr. Palmer that he sent him to the basement of the jail. Even worse, there was only a teeny tiny little window in the basement. There was no heat, and it was the middle of winter time. The snow fell. The snow fell. The cold winds blew. And Mr. Palmer had no blanket, no heat, and was very, very cold. What do you think Mr. Palmer did now that he was very, very cold and locked in the basement with no visitors? Well, Mr. Palmer's son still came to see him. Mr. Palmer's son still brought bread in a basket. Oh, gee whiz. Sorry, guys. And Mr. Palmer, although he could not even reach the window, would call to his son from inside of the jail and talk to him. So he developed a plan. He tied a string to one of the letters that he had written and threw it up through the bars of the only window and out to his son. His son caught the letter and put it in the bread basket. And Mr. Palmer said to his son,
"Take this letter to the High Sheriff. He needs to know about what's happening to me."
Of course, his lovely and loyal son did exactly what he asked. His son brought the letter to the sheriff of the town. Here's the sheriff with his star on top. And the sheriff of the town read this letter. And he said, "Oh my goodness, this man is being horribly mistreated for such a small crime. This punishment far outweighs the crime that he committed." And so the sheriff told the jailer, "Hey, buddy, you got to take him, bring him back upstairs and give him food and give him heat. He doesn't deserve to be treated like that for having a beard." Good thing someone finally stood up for him, right? Goodness. So the jailer brought Mr. Palmer back upstairs to the jailhouse with all the rest of the guys and out of solitary confinement. And that's where he waited till the end of the 1-year jail sentence. When the jailer came down the hall to release Mr. Palmer from jail, his family was with him. And his children and his wife were waiting for him to be released from jail. Upon being released from jail, the jailer, who really didn't like Mr. Palmer, he gave Mr. Palmer a bill for being in jail that forced him to pay for the food, the water, and the heat he used while he was there. Mr. Palmer looked at that bill and said, "Whoa, sir, that is totally unfair. I cannot pay this bill." Do you know how much that bill was for? That bill was for $10. But 200 years ago, $10 was more like thousands of dollars, like way more money. So Mr. Palmer's like, "Sir, I cannot pay this, and I will not pay this. It's not fair for me to have to pay for this while I was forcibly put in jail. I refuse." And the jailer said, "Well, then you cannot leave." And Mr. Palmer said, "I am a good man. I will not break the law, and I will not leave until you tell me I don't have to pay this bill." So Mr. Palmer hung on. He grabbed onto the bars, the jail bars, and he hung on to them and would not let them go no matter how hard people tried to pry him away. We want you out of here. You're a pain in our tuchus. And he held on. His family was very upset with him. Come on, Dad, just sign it. Come on, you know you want to be home. His wife was crying, and they all left and went home for the evening, very upset with their father and husband. Mr. Palmer held on to the bars of the jail and would not let go. The jailer was getting very upset, and he wanted to go home to eat dinner. So the jailer and his buddies pulled Mr. Palmer off of the jail cells and put him into a chair. Oops, here's the chair. Put him into a chair, strapped him to the chair, and walked him out of the jailhouse into the center of town. They set his chair down in the center of town and went home for dinner. They're like, you don't belong in jail anymore. Please leave. Please get out of here. And in the morning, when the morning sun rose and the jailer came back to jail to do his job, Mr. Palmer had gone home to his wife and children after all. The end. Isn't that crazy that a man went to jail for having a beard and defending himself? What a crazy thing. That goes to show you that even if something is the law, it might not always be correct. There are lots of things that laws tell us in different times that might not be necessarily good or correct for us to do. So we have to listen to our conscience, and we have to listen to our heart. And no matter what happens to you and what any law says or anybody says, I want you to today make a pledge with me. Say, what's your name? Whatever your name is, say, then your name. I, Mrs. Allie, pledge today, here and now, to always remain and be true to myself, even if other people are not doing what I do, and even if other people are mean to me if I do. It is so important to have courage. It is so important to be unique and to be yourself, even if other people don't like it. And that's the lesson that we take away from today. And that is why today is National Be Who You Are Day by Mr. Todd Parr. Thank you all so much for coming to this very silly story time. And on Friday, we're going to have a few more books that we can read about how others have managed to be themselves, even when people don't want them to be. Okay, everybody? So I hope to see you then. Thanks so much for coming, and I hope you have a wonderful day being just who you are, because you are important and you are different, and that is totally okay, and I love you. Okay? Have a good one, everybody. See you later.